Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah, I'm your host, Dave Markel, and this is episode 202. Before I begin, I want to let you know that today's episode includes a candid discussion about sexual coercion and rape within intimate relationships. I encourage you to be mindful of how this conversation may affect you and to pause the episode if needed to take a breather, reflect on how you're doing, and seek out support and help if you need to. Several of my recent episodes have included accounts of coercive sexual assault. Based on some of the comments I've received from listeners, I realized just how deeply the complexities and nuances of this form of sexual violence are still misunderstood. Throughout my career as a detective and in the many years I've spent training criminal justice professionals on the dynamics of sexual assault, I have seen that misunderstanding affect the way these cases are recognized, reported, and investigated. So today, I want to devote some time to several of the more important dynamics we need to understand when recognizing coercive sexual assault and rape within an intimate relationship. Most people recognize rape when an offender uses obvious physical force. Coercion can be more difficult for them to see because it requires an understanding of what was happening within the relationship before the sexual contact occurred. If we isolate one encounter from everything surrounding it, we may completely misunderstand what took place. Coercion can be described at its core as the deliberate creation or exploitation of circumstances that deprive another person of a genuine sexual choice. The offender may use fear, intimidation, threats, relentless pressure, financial dependency, emotional punishment, or an established history of violence. Whatever form it takes, the coercion has a purpose: to overcome another person's unwillingness to participate in sexual contact without regard for that person's right to decide what happens to their body. It may happen in a relationship that appears perfectly ordinary to everyone outside of it. The couple may work, raise children, attend church, spend time with friends, and share photographs of vacations and anniversaries. None of those things tell us what happens when one partner wants sex and the other does not. Inside the relationship, the offender may have spent months or years establishing the consequences of refusal. Perhaps a refusal has previously led to an outburst, a threat, a broken door, an accusation of infidelity, or hours of relentless confrontation. Maybe the offender has withheld money, threatened to leave, frightened the children, or used deeply personal information as leverage. Once that history exists, it accompanies every later sexual demand. The offender may only need to invoke it through a few words, a particular expression, or a change in demeanor that would mean nothing to an outsider, but is immediately understood by the victim. This is one reason an investigation cannot begin and end with the question, what did the offender say immediately before the sexual contact? An explicit threat made at that moment may be powerful evidence, but its absence tells us very little unless we understand the relationship in which the encounter occurred. People communicate through history. A threat that has already been demonstrated does not have to be fully restated each time it's used. Here's another issue. I've encountered the argument that if the victim eventually stopped objecting, then the encounter became consensual. That interpretation ignores everything the offender did to reach that point. It treats the final moment as though it appeared independently of the pressure, fear, and intimidation that preceded it. Consent cannot be separated from the circumstances in which it is expressed. A person may cease objecting because the offender has made continued opposition dangerous, futile, or unbearably costly. What has changed in that moment is not necessarily the person's desire. It may be only their understanding of what they must endure if the offender does not get what they want. There's a familiar tendency to examine the victim's behavior for the precise instant when we can declare that resistance was insufficient. The better question is why resistance was ever required. Once someone has communicated an unwillingness to participate, responsibility rests with the person seeking sexual contact. Continuing until opposition has been worn down does not produce mutuality. It reveals an unwillingness to accept the other person's decision. Some coercion is blunt. An offender threatens injury, abandonment, exposure, or financial ruin. Other forms are calculated to remain deniable. The offender may keep the victim awake for hours, follow them through the house, create an atmosphere of hostility, or turn every refusal into a crisis that consumes the entire family. Sex becomes the price of ending the confrontation. The offender can then point to the absence of physical force and claim nothing was taken. What this conveniently overlooks is that the offender engineered the circumstances in which refusing became unsafe. The means were different, but the objective was the same: sexual access without freely given consent. This pattern is sometimes mistaken for poor communication or a difference in sexual desire. Couples can certainly have different levels of desire, and they can experience disappointment, frustration, and rejection. Those are normal relationship difficulties. Coercion begins when one person responds to that difference by punishing the other person's autonomy or by manipulating the conditions under which a decision is made. The distinction is not whether one partner wanted sex more than the other. It's what that person chose to do when the answer was no. We also need more precision when discussing why offenders commit sexual assault. For years, people have repeated the statement that rape is about power and control rather than sex. I understand the reason for that statement, particularly as a response to the idea that rape is caused by uncontrollable desire. But human motivation is rarely that simple. An offender may be pursuing sexual gratification while also expressing entitlement, hostility, humiliation, dominance, or a desire to punish. These motives can, and often do, operate together. We do not have to pretend that sex is irrelevant in order to hold the offender accountable. A desire for sexual gratification becomes part of the offense when someone knowingly pursues that gratification at another person's expense and uses coercion to obtain it. Within a relationship, the offender may regard sexual access as a right attached to marriage or commitment. That belief can be reinforced by cultural or religious messages suggesting that one partner is obligated to satisfy the other. Yet, no ceremony, promise, or relationship status transfers control of a person's body to someone else. Sexual intimacy remains something two people choose together. Once choice is removed, the nature of the encounter has changed. Understanding the neuroscience of coercive abuse helps us appreciate how thoroughly an offender can affect another person's ability to experience and exercise choice. I want to discuss this carefully, without suggesting that every victim reacts identically or that a particular neurological response is required in order to establish an assault. The brain does not provide us with a checklist for determining victimization. What neuroscience offers is a better understanding of how human beings process danger, especially when it comes from someone close to them. The brain is continually using previous experience to anticipate what is likely to happen next. This predictive function allows us to move through the world without consciously analyzing every sound, expression, or movement. In an abusive relationship, the brain becomes familiar with the offender's patterns. It learns which changes in voice have preceded violence, which accusations have led to hours of interrogation, and which movements have signaled that an encounter is becoming dangerous. This learning can occur with astonishing specificity. The victim may recognize a nearly imperceptible alteration in the offender's facial expression or hear something threatening in a seemingly ordinary sentence. Someone outside the relationship may see nothing alarming because they do not possess the history that gives the signal its meaning. The victim's perception of danger is sometimes dismissed as oversensitivity. In reality, the brain has learned to recognize a sequence. It is anticipating a danger that has followed the same cues before. That capacity is fundamental to survival. When the brain identifies a threat, it begins adjusting the body to meet it. The autonomic nervous system can change heart rate, breathing, muscle tension, pain perception, and awareness before the person has time to make a deliberate plan. Stress hormones mobilize energy, while attention may narrow toward the most immediate source of danger. Under those conditions, the brain is not calmly comparing every possible response. It is trying to manage the risk in real time, using the information available from previous encounters with the offender. If confrontation has made the violence worse in the past, the nervous system incorporates that knowledge. If attempts to leave have resulted in being restrained, threatened, followed, or punished later, those experiences also shape the assessment. This does not mean that the victim becomes incapable of thought. It means thought is occurring within danger rather than safety. Choices that appear available to someone reviewing the incident later may not have been safe, practical, or even possible for the person living through it. Coercive abuse creates a neurological problem that is different from a single, unexpected threat. The source of danger is woven into the victim's daily life. It may sleep in the same bed, have access to every room in the house, know every friend, share the bank account, and exercise authority over the children. There may be no dependable place in which the nervous system can fully stand down. Over time, the body's stress systems can become dysregulated. Some victims remain intensely alert, monitoring the offender's mood and anticipating the next shift. Others become exhausted, emotionally numb, or even detached. Sleep, concentration, physical health, and memory may all be affected. A person can appear calm while experiencing an enormous amount of internal distress. Conversely, someone may appear disorganized or highly emotional because the demand to manage danger has exceeded the nervous system's capacity to regulate it. These effects are sometimes used to discredit victims. A delayed or fragmented account may be treated as deception. Continued contact with the offender may be interpreted as proof that the victim was never afraid. Apparent calmness is seen as evidence that nothing serious happened, while intense emotion is characterized as instability. The victim is placed in an impossible position because almost any response can be recast as suspicious by someone determined not to understand trauma. Memory under stress also deserves careful consideration. During a threatening experience, attention is often directed towards the information the brain considers most important for immediate survival. A person may have an extraordinarily clear memory of the offender's face, a sentence, a sound, or a physical sensation, yet have difficulty reconstructing the precise order of surrounding details. That is not a universal response, nor does it mean every inconsistency should be ignored. It does mean that outsiders must understand that memory is an active biological process, not a video recording stored intact in the brain. Dissociation can further affect the experience. Some victims describe feeling detached from their bodies, or as though events were happening at a distance. Time may feel distorted. Sensation and awareness may change. These experiences can be deeply confusing afterward, particularly for someone who expected they would respond to danger in a much more visible way. None of these neurological processes tells us whether the victim did enough to prevent the assault. That's not their relevance. They help explain how exposure to coercion can alter attention, perception, memory, emotion, and the ability to evaluate danger. They also expose the fallacy of judging a person's behavior from the comfort and safety of hindsight. Physical arousal during unwanted sexual contact is another area in which a basic understanding of physiology is essential. The body can respond automatically to stimulation even when the experience is frightening, painful, degrading, or unwanted. A physical response does not reveal a hidden desire and cannot supply consent. Offenders may use that response to humiliate the victim or deny the assault, and survivors may carry profound confusion because they did not understand that the body's reflexes and a person's voluntary wishes are separate matters. The relational context can make all of this even more difficult to comprehend. The offender may be someone the victim loves, and in other parts of the relationship continues to experience as loving. Abuse does not necessarily erase attachment, shared history, hope, financial independence, concern for children, or the belief that the person may change. That complexity often makes outsiders uncomfortable. They want the victim's behavior to provide a clear verdict on the relationship. If the victim remains, returns, communicates affectionately, or later has consensual sex with the offender, people begin rewriting the earlier assault. But a later change cannot provide consent retroactively. Human attachment can survive terrible violations, and the continuation of that attachment tells us nothing definitive about whether a particular sexual act was freely chosen. Many victims also struggle to identify coercive sexual experiences as rape. They may have been taught that rape is committed by strangers, or that a spouse cannot sexually assault a spouse. If coercion developed gradually, the victim may have spent years adapting to conduct they have never had the space or language to examine. The offender may have repeatedly defined the behavior as normal and portrayed any objection as selfish, prudish, unloving, or disloyal. Because of this, a disclosure may therefore begin as an account of what has been happening, rather than a conclusion about what it should be called. A competent listener will not rush to impose a label, but neither will that listener minimize the conduct simply because the victim has not yet named it. The task is to understand the circumstances fully and allow the victim to describe the experience in their own language. For investigators, authorities, or even friends, this means moving beyond an incident-centered approach. The immediate encounter matters, but so does the system in which it occurred. A careful investigation examines how the offender responded to previous refusals, whether threats or punishment had established the meaning of the later conduct, and what resources the offender controlled. Text messages, financial records, prior reports, medical evidence, witness observations, damaged property, digital surveillance, apologies, and the offender's own explanations may reveal far more than a narrow search for physical injury. A trauma-informed investigation does not assume the truth of an allegation. It does not lower evidentiary standards, and it does not prevent legitimate questions from being asked. It actually improves the quality of the investigation by replacing myth and assumption with knowledge. It considers offender behavior alongside victim experience and recognizes that the evidence of coercion may be distributed across the history of the relationship. It also requires investigators to examine their own perceptions. If an investigator privately believes marriage implies sexual activity, that belief will influence the questions asked, the evidence pursued, and the meaning assigned to the answers. If the investigator expects a genuine victim to leave immediately or report without delay, ordinary complexities of intimate partner violence may be mistaken for evidence of fabrication. Bias does not always announce itself as hostility. Sometimes it appears as a question that seems perfectly reasonable until we examine the assumption underneath it. For anyone listening who has experienced sexual coercion in a relationship, you may still be uncertain about how to understand what happened. You may love the person responsible. You may have built an entire life together. You may remember moments of genuine tenderness and wonder how they can coexist with what you experienced. There is no contradiction in recognizing both. The good moments do not cancel the violation, and the violation does not require you to deny every feeling you have ever had for that person. You are entitled to reach an understanding in your own time with support that respects your safety and autonomy. The responsibility for coercive sexual assault rests with the person who created or exploited fear in order to obtain sexual contact. Examining how a victim managed that danger may help us understand trauma, but it must never become a substitute for examining the offender's choices. The essential issue is straightforward, even when the surrounding relationship is not. Sexual intimacy requires freedom. Where fear, intimidation, threats, or an established system of coercion has taken that freedom away, the presence of a relationship does not make the resulting sexual contact consensual. It makes the betrayal more intimate. If today's discussion has raised concerns about your own safety or something you've experienced, the National Sexual Assault Hotline can be reached at 1-800-656-HOPE. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available at 1-800-799-SAFE. Please remember that internet searches and telephone activity may be visible to someone with access to your devices or accounts. So, use the safest method available to you when seeking support. Thank you for listening and for being willing to engage with a form of sexual violence that remains widely misunderstood. Until we understand coercion, we will continue making the absence of visible force for the presence of consent. Survivors deserve better than that. And if you're an investigator, the integrity of our investigations demands better than that. As always, as you consider the content of my monologue today, please remember to do your part to help raise awareness of the need to normalize this conversation and to help rid our society of rape culture. One of the best ways that I know to do this is to follow the guidance of End Violence Against Women International, which is start by believing. Another excellent way of helping would be to share this episode with everyone you can, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. Remember to tune in again next Tuesday as I bring you another amazing guest who will share their experiences with us as we strive to provide information and insight on healing and moving forward. We'll see you next week.